Imagine Christmas Eve. The whole family is gathered around the table. The roast is carved and steaming. My granddaughter is wearing a paper crown she made herself at school, and my grandson is pretending he doesn't care about presents anymore because he's 13 now and too old for all of that. My son tops off his wine glass and clears his throat, and then he says the words I will carry for the rest of my life. He says, "Dad, honestly, you've become dead weight around here. We want our house back." I put my fork down. I folded my napkin. I stood up from a table I had helped pay for, in a house I had helped build with my own 2 hands, and I walked upstairs without a single word. Before I tell you what happened next, please subscribe to this channel and drop a comment letting me know what time it is wherever you are watching this tonight. The smell of pine from the wreath on the front door followed me up the staircase. 14 steps. I know because I'd replaced the 3rd one myself back in October when it started to creak, hauling my tools up from the truck without being asked, the same way I'd always done things my entire life, without being asked, without expecting a thank you, because that's what fathers do. My name is Harold Mitchum. Everyone calls me Hal. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a master electrician for Garfield County, retired with a pension that isn't generous, but it's mine, and for the past 2 years I've been living in the back bedroom of my son Ryan's house in Crestwood Falls, Oregon, ever since my wife Patricia passed from a stroke that came out of nowhere on a Tuesday morning in February. Ryan had asked me to come. His exact words were, "Dad, we want you here. Don't be stubborn." I had not been stubborn. I had come. I had made myself useful every single day. I sat on the edge of the bed in that back room and listened to the house settle around me. Downstairs, voices started up. Kristen's low and controlled, the voice she used when she was managing a situation. Ryan's louder, defensive, already retreating into justifications. My granddaughter Sophie's voice cutting through both of them, high and confused, asking why Grandpa left the table. And then Caleb, 13 years old, saying nothing at all, which told me more than anything else could. Dead weight. I looked at my hands. 40 years of work in those hands. Scars on the left palm from a panel job in 1998. A knuckle that never healed right after an accident in the yard the summer Ryan turned 12. I had wired houses, repaired circuit breakers in February ice storms, driven through floods to restore power to families I didn't know. Patricia used to say my hands were the most honest thing about me. I think she meant it as a compliment. I pulled my duffel bag from the closet shelf and set it on the bed. 3 pairs of jeans, 5 work shirts. My good flannel, the dark green one Patricia had given me for our 28th anniversary. My shaving kit. The wooden box where I kept the small things that mattered. Patricia's watch. A photograph from our trip to Crater Lake in 2015. A birthday card Sophie had made me 2 years ago with a drawing of the 2 of us fishing. Stick figures but precise. She'd even drawn my cap. I wrapped that card carefully in the flannel before I packed it. My phone lit up. Ryan's name on the screen. I let it ring. It rang 3 more times in the next 10 minutes. Then Kristen called once, which surprised me. I let that ring too. Then, silence. The kind of silence that a house full of people can produce when everyone is suddenly aware that something has broken. I came downstairs with my duffel over one shoulder and my toolbox in the other hand. The big red Craftsman that had belonged to my own father, who'd been a plumber for 40 years in Bend before his back gave out. That toolbox had outlasted 2 trucks and 1 marriage that wasn't mine. I kept it because it was the most solid thing I owned. Ryan was standing in the kitchen doorway. He'd taken his tie off. His face had the look of a man who had said something and was now calculating how expensive it was going to be. "Dad, come on. Sit back down. I am going." "You're being dramatic." He said it gently, like that made it better. "It came out wrong. That's not what I meant." "What did you mean?" He ran a hand through his hair. Kristen appeared behind him, arms folded, watching but not speaking. Sophie came running from the living room and grabbed my free hand with both of hers. "Grandpa, don't go. It's Christmas." I crouched down to her level. 7 years old, with Patricia's eyes and the gap between her front teeth that she'd had since the summer. "I love you, sweetheart. That doesn't change. Not ever." "Then why are you leaving?" "Because your father asked me to." I didn't say it. She was 7. I'll explain when you're older, baby. Caleb was at the top of the stairs, looking down. He didn't say anything, just watched. I held his gaze for a moment and nodded at him. And he gave me the smallest nod back, the kind that means I understand, even when you're 13 and you don't understand it all yet. I walked out the front door into a Christmas Eve that was doing its best, cold and clear, stars punching through the clouds above the rooftops of Milner Street. My truck was parked at the curb. I loaded my things in the bed and sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, with the engine idling, heater trying to catch up. Through the front window, I could see the Christmas tree lights blinking. I pulled away from the curb without looking back. The Birchwood Inn on Route 9 was the kind of motel where the ice machine works, but nothing else is guaranteed. The woman at the desk had the night shift exhaustion of someone who had seen every kind of arrival. She gave me room 7 without ceremony. $58 a night or $3.20 for the week. I took the weekly rate. The room smelled of old carpet and the particular loneliness of places where people only stay temporarily. I set Patricia's photograph on the nightstand before I did anything else. The lamp threw a warm circle around her face. She was laughing in that picture, wind off the lake, pulling her hair across her cheek, squinting into the sun. She looked like a woman who had no reason to believe anything would ever go seriously wrong. I sat at the small desk and took out the notepad the motel provided, the cheap kind that tears if you press too hard with a pen. Pension, $1,940 per month. Social Security, $1,180. Total, Tres, Senvint. Motel at weekly rate, $1,280 per month. Food, medicine, incidentals, $600. Gas, $150. Enough. Not comfortable, but enough. I had $38,000 in savings, built over decades of packed lunches and used vehicles and one vacation per year to somewhere within driving distance, because Patricia and I had agreed long ago that we didn't need to be the kind of people who flew to places. Then I opened my phone and pulled up the auto pay I had set on the first of every month, $900 to Ryan's mortgage account. The same transfer that had gone out reliably for 22 months without a single acknowledgement. I looked at it for a long time. Dead weight. My thumb moved to cancel. The screen asked me to confirm. I confirmed. Then I turned the phone face down and stared at the water stain on the ceiling for a long time before sleep came, and when it came, it was thin and full of dreams I couldn't hold on to. By 6 in the morning, I was awake and had been for an hour. 7 missed calls, 4 from Ryan, 2 from Kristen, 1 from a number I didn't recognize. I read the texts instead of listening to voicemails. Ryan: Dad, this is ridiculous. Call me back. Ryan again: The kids are upset. Kristen: Harold, we need to discuss this rationally. Ryan a third time: Dad, I know you're awake. Then one from Kristen that stopped me cold. The mortgage auto payment didn't process this morning. Is something wrong with your account? I put the phone down on the desk. Something is very right with my account, I thought. I showered in water that took 4 minutes to turn warm and dressed in my good flannel because it was Christmas Day and Patricia had always said there was no excuse for not presenting yourself properly on Christmas Day. Then I drove to the only diner in Crestwood Falls that was open on holidays, which was Lou's on Caldwell Avenue, because Lou Petrakis had never closed for anything in 30 years. Including the ice storm of 2019, that put the whole town out of power for 6 days, which I knew personally because I was one of the crew that restored it. The place was half full with the particular mix of Christmas morning. People who had nowhere to go, people who were traveling through, people who worked in the hospital or the fire station and had stopped in before a shift. Patsy Drummond was waitressing, same as she'd been doing since before Ryan was born. Gray in her hair now, but the same efficiency in the way she moved between tables. She saw me come in and her face changed. Hal Mitchum. Why in God's name are you here on Christmas morning? Cup of coffee and whatever Lou's got on special. She poured the coffee without moving away. Where's Ryan's place from here? 3 miles? 2.5. And you're sitting at my counter on Christmas morning. Patsy. Don't patsy me. What happened? So I told her. Told her about Christmas Eve and the roast and the paper crown and dead weight. Her expression moved through surprise and landed hard on fury. She refilled my coffee, though it was still full. He said that at the table, in front of the children. He did. That boy. She shook her head slowly in a way that was not a compliment. I remember when he was 12 years old, and you worked overtime for 3 months straight to get him that bicycle he wanted. The red one. And he was on it for 2 weeks before he decided he wanted a different one. I hadn't thought about that bicycle in 20 years. It arrived in my chest like a small stone dropping into water. You need to talk to Dennis Foley, Patsy said, placing a plate of eggs in front of me. He does elder law over on Prescott Street. Volunteers Tuesday nights at the community center. I don't need a lawyer, Patsy. You've been paying their mortgage for almost 2 years, and you don't need a lawyer. She wasn't asking. She took 3 steps away and came back. And you need to talk to Beverly Okafor. She runs a group. Wednesday evenings. People who've been through exactly this. I ate my eggs and thought about the word exactly. Ryan appeared at the diner window at 9:17. I saw the Audi before I saw him, idling at the curb. He came through the door in the same clothes as the night before, which meant he hadn't slept either. Patsy met him before he got 3 steps inside. Merry Christmas, Ryan. Morning, Patsy. Dad, We're open to the public on Christmas, she said pleasantly. Same rules as always. He looked at her, recalibrated, and took the stool next to me. Neither of us spoke for a moment. You canceled the payment, he said. I did. The mortgage comes out of our account on the 3rd. If your payment doesn't come in first, we're going to be short. I know how mortgages work, Ryan. I've been paying yours for 22 months. He lowered his voice, even though half the diner was already pretending not to listen. Dad, look. What I said last night came out harsh. Kristen and I have been under a lot of stress, and Dead weight. I said the words at normal conversational volume. You called me dead weight in front of your children on Christmas Eve. His jaw tightened. I told you it came out wrong. It came out exactly as you meant it. You've been meaning it for a while. I could tell. I looked at him. He had Patricia's forehead, that particular way of setting the brow when he was uncomfortable. It used to mean he'd done something wrong and was working up to admitting it. Now it just meant he was calculating. When did I become dead weight to you? I didn't say you were. Ryan. I kept my voice level. 31 years of working jobs where a wrong call could kill someone teaches you to stay level. I paid $900 toward your mortgage every month for nearly 2 years. I repaired your deck last spring, replaced the water line to your dishwasher in September, rewired the garage outlet in October. I've watched your children 3 afternoons a week so Kristen could take her clients on showing days. At what point in that inventory does a man become dead weight? He had no answer for that. Patsy appeared with coffee for Ryan without being asked, the way she'd been doing since he was a teenager, and this was the closest thing to neutral ground the town had. The payment is canceled, I said. I'm at the Birchwood on Route 9. When you decide you'd like to have an actual conversation, you know where to find me. I left a 20 on the counter, nodded to Patsy, and walked out into the clearest Christmas Day Crestwood Falls had seen in years. He called 14 times before nightfall. I answered none of them. On the second day, Kristen called. I answered that one. Harold, her realtor voice, practiced and warm and not particularly genuine. I think this has gone far enough. The children are, Kristen, I've paid $900 to your household every month for 22 months. That is $19,800. Before that, I co-signed the original mortgage in 2016 when Ryan's debt-to-income ratio wouldn't qualify him alone. I paid for the roof in 2020 when that tree came down. $14,000. I paid for Ryan's business certificate program 3 years ago. $7,000. I paid off the remaining balance on your car in 2021 when the interest was eating you alive. $6,000. I have every receipt, every bank statement, every transfer record, going back 9 years. I did not do those things expecting gratitude. I did them because I believed in this family. But I will not be called dead weight and continue writing checks. That's all I have to say. A long silence. You have no right to make this about money, she said. Kristen, I didn't make it about anything. I'm simply answering what you raised. We'll be in contact through our attorney. I hadn't expected that. For a moment, the phone felt heavier. Then, that is your right. Good day. I sat in room 7 of the Birchwood Inn and took out my notepad again. This time I wrote down everything. Dates and amounts, going back to 2015. When Ryan and Kristen had first bought the Milner Street house, and I had handed over a check for the down payment shortfall because their savings weren't enough. $22,000. I'd been keeping records the way I'd always kept records, the way my father kept records, the way any tradesman learns to document his work because someday someone will tell you the job wasn't done and you need to be able to prove otherwise. Someday had arrived. Wednesday evening, I drove to the Crestwood Falls Community Center for the first time in my life. Beverly Okafor was standing at the entrance, handing out flyers. A woman in her 60s with close-cropped gray hair and the carriage of someone who had decided some years ago that she was done being invisible. She shook my hand before I could introduce myself. "Patsy called me," she said simply. "I'm glad you came." The meeting room held 11 people in a circle of folding chairs, around a coffee table with a box of store-brand cookies no one was eating. Ages ranged from my end of the decade up to a woman who must have been 80 and who sat with the stillness of someone who had done considerable waiting in her life. Beverly opened the meeting the way you open a door that's been stuck, directly, without ceremony. Ground rules, confidence, no judgment. A man named Gerald went first, 72, retired postal carrier. His daughter had convinced him to sign a power of attorney 4 years ago for convenience. He discovered last spring that 3 accounts had been quietly drained over 2 years. $67,000. His daughter was currently living in Phoenix with a man Gerald had never met. A woman named Ruth had her story delivered in a flat voice that had clearly told it many times in private. Her son had sold her car to simplify things while she was recovering from knee surgery. She'd come home from rehab to find the driveway empty and a check in an envelope on the kitchen table for $4,000 less than the car was worth. And then there was a man named Walt, 70 years old, built like a former athlete gone patient with age, who looked at the floor when he spoke. "My son uses my granddaughter," he said. "That's the whole mechanism. I want to see her for her birthday. It costs money. Christmas costs money. I haven't seen her in 8 months because I ran out of what they were asking." He looked up. "She's 9 years old. She doesn't know any of this. She just thinks her grandpa doesn't come around anymore." The room was quiet for a moment. That kind of quiet that isn't silence, but accumulation. I stood up when it was my turn. 2 nights in a motel room had organized my thoughts the way discomfort always did for me. I laid out the facts plainly. The amounts, the years, the services rendered, the 2 words that had ended it. Dead weight. "How much total?" Beverly asked, pen over her notepad. "Documented? Somewhere north of 70,000 over 9 years. Gerald made a sound that wasn't a word. "And your son retained an attorney?" Beverly said. "His wife said they would be in contact through one. Then you need Dennis Foley before Friday." She wrote his number on a card and held it out. "He's good, and he has seen all of this before." "And Harold, do you have the documentation?" "I have everything." "Good." She looked around the circle. "This is exactly why documentation matters. They can't argue receipts." The conversation that followed moved from individual grief into something else. Collective pattern recognition. Same story, different names. The same phrases appearing across different households, different states, different family configurations. The children's therapy language weaponized against the parents who'd funded the therapy. The entitled belief that sacrifice was owed and therefore invisible. The grandchildren deployed as leverage. Walt said quietly. "We all gave everything we had, and they turned us into problems to be managed." I looked at the circle of faces and felt something shift. Not anger, exactly. Something harder and more durable than anger. The specific clarity that comes when you understand precisely where you stand. "What if we did something about it?" I said. Beverly looked up. "Not revenge, documentation, protection, a structure that makes exploitation difficult and public." The thoughts were coming quickly now, the way good wiring solutions came to me on a job, each piece connecting to the next. A fund, mutual aid, legal support, visibility. If enough seniors in this county are organized and represented, It changes the calculation for the people taking advantage of them. Gerald leaned forward. Like a cooperative. Like a wall, Walt said. Beverly was already writing. I know a meeting room we can use, and Dennis Foley has been wanting to expand into community work. We stayed 2 hours past the scheduled end time. When I drove back to the Birchwood that night, the notepad in my pocket had 6 pages of notes instead of financial calculations. Dennis Foley occupied an office above the hardware store on Prescott Street that smelled of wood stain and old coffee, which I found encouraging. He was 58, a compact man with reading glasses pushed up on his head and the kind of desk that held 40 years of other people's problems in organized piles. His handshake was the grip of a man who'd grown up working. My uncle was a carpenter, he said, looking at my documentation. Someone came after his savings when he was 71. By the time I knew enough to help him, half of it was gone. He turned a page. You kept very good records. Threadmisman, Obbit. It's going to serve you well. He spread the bank statements across his desk in chronological order. Here's what you have. $19,800 in documented mortgage contributions over 22 months. Co-signature liability on the original mortgage from 2016. A documented roof payment of $14,000 in 2020. $7,000 for professional education. $6,000 for vehicle debt payoff. Additional labor contributions for repairs on the property. He looked up. You have a strong case for unjust enrichment if they pursue any legal action against you. They mentioned going through an attorney. Standard intimidation. Let them. He folded his hands. What I recommend is a revocable trust for your current assets, with terms that make them inaccessible to family claims. Your pension and Social Security remain yours, regardless. And I'd like to draft a formal letter to their attorney documenting your contributions to date. It typically ends that conversation quickly. How much for the trust? For the first year, given that you're helping Beverly start this coalition, I'll do it at cost. $1,500. I wrote the check before I left the building. Kristen appeared at the Birchwood on a Thursday afternoon 3 weeks into January, wearing her showing houses blazer and carrying 2 cups of coffee from the good place on Main, offering grounds. I watched her through the window before I opened the door. She set the coffee on the small table and sat in the desk chair. I sat on the bed. She had the look of a woman who had come with a prepared statement and was already departing from it. The mortgage company sent a notice, she said. I know. Ryan's under review at work. There's apparently been some discussion about whether his judgment is sound. She paused. People are talking, Harold. People always talk. The question is whether what they're saying is true. She looked at her coffee cup. What would it take? Not a question, really. A negotiation opener. I'd sat across from enough contractors to recognize it. The same thing it would have taken on Christmas Eve if Ryan had shown 1 degree of genuine remorse instead of asking about the payment. I kept my voice even, an acknowledgement of what was done. A real one, not a managed one. Continued therapy for both of you, my grandchildren, and complete financial independence. No requests. No leveraging the grandchildren for access. That's my position. I stood. I'm not asking for punishment. I'm asking for honesty. Those are different things. She left the coffee and drove away in the Lexus that I had helped make possible with a $6,000 check in the spring of 2021. I stood at the window and watched it go. The Crestwood Falls Senior Protection Alliance held its first formal meeting on the second Thursday of February at the community center, in a room that Beverly had furnished with real chairs borrowed from the church next door. 41 people attended. Dennis was there. A reporter named Caroline Walsh from the Crestwood Courier was there, with a notepad, not a recorder, which I respected. The mayor sent a representative who sat in the back row and took notes and said nothing. I stood at a whiteboard and explained what we were building. A mutual aid fund for seniors facing financial exploitation. Legal consultation through Dennis. A documentation library of common tactics. A transparency mechanism that made every transaction visible to the entire board. Gerald had brought his military-grade organizational instincts. Ruth had nonprofit experience from her years running a food pantry. Walt, it turned out, had been an accountant before he retired. Each person in that room had been reduced to a problem. Together they were a solution. When I finished, a woman in the third row raised her hand. Margaret Holloway, 71, former schoolteacher. Her son had forged her signature on a home equity line of credit. She discovered it by accident when reviewing her credit report. $42,000, gone into a business venture that had since failed. She had the documentation. She had the police report. She had the quiet fury of an educator who understood exactly what had been done to her and why. "I've been embarrassed for 8 months," she said. "I thought it reflected on me somehow, like I should have known better." She looked around the room, sitting here. "I understand it reflects on him." The applause started in the back. Caroline Walsh's article ran on a Sunday. She had done it correctly, precise, documented, no dramatics needed because the facts were dramatic enough on their own. Financial exploitation of seniors by adult family members, occurring locally and nationally with specific numbers from the National Council on Aging. My name, my numbers, my decision to act rather than retreat. Beverly's work at the community center. Dennis's legal framework. The fund's initial balance, which had reached $12,000 after the first 2 weeks of contributions. The hashtag started locally and moved faster than I expected. A woman in Eugene shared it. Someone in Portland. A retired firefighter in Medford who had lost $40,000 to a daughter-in-law in a 2-year scheme. The mayor called Beverly. The county commissioner called Dennis. Both wanted to be associated with what was forming. Beverly handled them with the measured diplomacy of someone who knew exactly what public attention was worth and what it cost. Ryan called me on the Sunday the article ran. The first call I'd received from him since the second week of January. I let it ring. Then I picked up the second one. "Dad." His voice was different. The negotiating register was gone. What was underneath it was less composed. I saw the article. I would expect so. A long pause. "Kristen and I are not things are not good right now." "I know." The bank sent a formal notice. "We have 60 days. "I know that too." "Dad, I'm not calling to ask about the mortgage." He said it carefully, like a man choosing each word because he knew they all mattered. "I'm calling because Caleb asked me last night why his grandfather wasn't around anymore, and I didn't have an answer. Or I had one, but it was the wrong kind." I sat in the desk chair and looked at Patricia's photograph. She was still laughing in the wind off the lake, still squinting into the sun, still believing in something. "What kind was it?" I asked. The kind where the answer was still about me. That was the most honest thing he had said to me in years. Maybe longer than years. I didn't rush to fill the silence. "I've been seeing a therapist," he said. "Not the kind who gives me vocabulary to use on you. A different kind. One who makes me look at things." Another pause. She had me make a list. Specific things. Every amount I could document or remember. What you'd done for us over the years. His voice thickened slightly. "I stopped at $112,000, and I still wasn't at the end of the list, Dad. I wasn't keeping score." "I know. That's the worst part of it. A sound that might have been him clearing his throat or something else. I turned you into a number I could dismiss. I used language that made it sound like self-care when it was just selfishness wearing better clothes. I had waited 2 months for something close to this. Now that it was here, it didn't feel triumphant. It felt like looking at a broken circuit you'd spent weeks tracing. You're glad to have found it. You're tired from looking. What do you want, Ryan?" "I want to figure out if there's a way back. Not back to how it was. I know that's gone, but back to something. A breath. I want my kids to know their grandfather. I want to stop being the man who said that to you at Christmas dinner." I looked at Patricia. She'd known Ryan his entire life, known him better than I had in some ways. She would have said, "He means it, Hal," and she would have said, "But meaning it isn't enough." She would have been right on both counts. "There are conditions," I said. "Name them." "You continue therapy, family therapy as well, with Caleb and Sophie included at the appropriate level. You volunteer at the senior center, minimum 2 Saturdays per month for 1 year. You never use my grandchildren as leverage in any disagreement between us. You build toward financial independence from me, and I mean genuinely build, not symbolically. And you tell me the truth, every time. I'm too old to sort through managed versions of it. Yes, no delay. All of it, yes. I did not tell him I forgave him. I told him that trust was built the way a house was built, one course at a time, and the foundation had to be level first, or nothing above it would stand. He said he understood that. I told him I'd call him the following week. I sat in room 7 for a long time after we hung up. The neon vacancy sign outside blinked through the thin curtains. Somewhere in the parking lot, a car started and idled for a few minutes and then drove away. I thought about Caleb at the top of the stairs on Christmas Eve, watching, saying nothing. I thought about Sophie asking why Grandpa left the table. I thought about the wooden box in my duffel bag and the stick figure drawing of 2 people fishing, and how Sophie had been precise enough to draw the cap. I picked up the phone and called Beverly. I think I'm going to find an apartment, I said. Good, she said immediately. I have a building in mind. 2nd floor, decent light, close to the park. I'm not ready to go back to Milner Street. I didn't suggest Milner Street. I suggested an apartment. Your own place, Hal. For you. A brief pause. Patricia would want you to have your own place. She was right. Patricia would have said something exactly like that and then changed the subject before I could argue. The apartment on Clover Street was $1,200 a month, 1 bedroom, 2nd floor as advertised, with a window over the side yard that had a view of a maple tree that was bare now but would be something in spring. I moved in on the first Saturday of March. Gerald and Walt helped me carry things up the stairs. Ruth brought a casserole. Beverly brought a small plant she said required almost no attention, which she said with the specific authority of someone who knew my limitations. I unpacked in 2 hours, hung Patricia's photograph on the wall, where I could see it from the kitchen table, set the toolbox by the front door, put the wooden box with Sophie's drawing on the nightstand. That afternoon, Caleb and Sophie appeared at my door. Sophie had brought a drawing she'd done at school of a house with people in front of it, same technique as always, stick figures but earnest. She'd put a star on the roof. Because it's special, she explained. Caleb sat on the kitchen chair and told me about his basketball team and a history project he was working on about the labor movement in Oregon, which I told him I could speak to directly since I had been part of the IBEW for 3 decades. He asked genuine questions, the way a 13-year-old does when something has shifted in his understanding of the world and he's trying to recalibrate. Ryan came to pick them up. He stood in the doorway without coming in, the way a person stands when they understand they haven't been invited yet. He looked at the apartment. Small, simple, everything in its right place. Nice place, he said quietly. It is. Sophie pulled his hand. Grandpa's going to teach Caleb about unions, Dad. Ryan looked at his son and then at me. Something moved across his face that I didn't try to name. Good, he said. That's a good thing to know about. We didn't hug. We didn't make speeches. He took his kids and drove home to a house that was now genuinely his problem to solve, to a mortgage that required his own income and his own effort, to a life that was structurally his in the way it had never quite been when I was quietly holding the underside of it. I closed the apartment door and sat at the kitchen table and listened to the building settle around me. The Alliance held its monthly meeting that Wednesday. 48 members now, with 3 from the county over who'd driven an hour each way. Margaret Holloway had become our vice chair. Gerald ran the financial subcommittee with the precision of a man who had spent a career moving envelopes through every kind of weather. Dennis reported that 2 of our member cases had been settled favorably before reaching court. The fund had grown to $31,000. We had prevented 4 foreclosures, funded emergency medical costs for 2 members who had been quietly skipping medications to make ends meet, connected 11 people with family law resources, published a guide, Dennis's language, Beverly's layout, my proofreading, that was being used in 4 other counties. Caroline Walsh came to the meeting to say the story had been picked up by a paper in Portland, and there were inquiries from a news station in Seattle. How does it feel? She asked me afterward. The same question reporters always come back to. I thought about Christmas Eve. I thought about room 7 and the neon sign and 40 years of documentation in a folder and a canceled bank transfer and a Wednesday evening in a circle of people who had all made the same mistake, believing that family meant something permanent, Like something that was always necessary, I said. We just didn't know we could do it until we had to. I drove home on roads that knew me, past the high school where Ryan had played in the band, badly, for 2 years before switching to baseball, past the church where Patricia and I had been married and where I had carried her in 32 years later, in a way I had not been prepared for, past the electrical substation I'd worked on in 2009 and the housing development on the east side that had my wiring in its walls and would for the next 100 years. Crestwood Falls knew my face, my truck, my history. It knew Ryan's too, now, in ways that had complicated his professional life and his social ease. That was not something I had engineered. It was the natural consequence of small-town memory, which is long and specific and does not forget what it witnesses. He was doing the work. Slowly, imperfectly, with the stumbling quality of someone learning a skill they should have learned earlier. His therapist apparently had given him reading assignments. He'd called me twice in the past month with questions rather than positions, which was different and better. He'd shown up at the senior center on a Saturday in February and helped repaint the activity room without being acknowledged for it, which Beverly had mentioned to me as significant. He was teaching Caleb compound interest, the long kind, the kind that required patience and consistent input and didn't pay off immediately. I had not forgiven him completely. Forgiveness is not a switch. It is closer to what happens when you repair a compromised line. You don't pretend the damage didn't occur. You locate exactly where it happened. You replace what is beyond repair and test what remains. And you restore function deliberately. It takes time. It takes honesty about the extent of the damage. And it requires that the structure be sound before you run current through it again. We were in the testing phase. It was early. That Saturday, I drove to Riverside Park, the park where Patricia and I had spent 400 weekday mornings over the years, walking the path by the creek before work. The maples were budding, that particular pale green that only exists for about a week in early spring before deepening. A family was flying a kite badly, but enthusiastically in the open field. An old man was feeding the ducks on the near bank with the focused generosity of someone who had found his purpose. I sat on the bench that looked across the water and opened the notebook I'd been carrying since January. It held 14 pages of notes now. The Alliance's organizational framework, legal templates Dennis had let me copy. A list of members and their needs. Numbers I'd checked and rechecked until they were sound. At the bottom of the last page, underneath everything else, I had written 2 words in my own handwriting on the night I moved into the apartment. Not dead weight, just beginning. The morning light came through the maple branches and fell across the water in pieces, shifting with the breeze the way good light does, refusing to be still, refusing to be managed, doing exactly what light has always done, regardless of who is watching. I put the notebook in my coat pocket and sat quietly for a long while, watching it.